Hey everyone, welcome to Color Theory. No better place to do color theory than out in the garden. So I'm outside, I've got my scissors. I'm going to see what I can find in all colors of the rainbow so that we can then go inside and match the color and learn how colors mix and blend. So right here I've got some really nice purple morning glories. They've got purple and pink in them. They're really beautiful. And we're going to grab a couple of these. Of course, morning glories bloom in the morning and close up pretty quick, so you want to get in there to match that color pretty quick. And the green leaves are pretty too, so let's grab some of that. Put them all in my basket here, and then I've got some nice yellow small sunflowers here, so we'll grab a couple of these as well. And just for your purple and yellow or opposites on the color wheel, we'll talk about that later. All right, here we've got Jack in the Pulpit. It's starting to form seeds. It goes green and they turn this bright red. Here's one that's developing a little bit more. That's a great way to match some bright red colors. All right, here's my purple sunflower, and I'm just comparing it to this chicory flower, because these are a bluer. They're still a bit lavender-like, but much bluer than the morning glory, so it's nice to get something like that so we can continue. And these are lighter in color also, so these are chicory. All right, so here's our yellow sunflower, and look, we've got some sun gold tomatoes here, more orange, so that's a great way to work around the color wheel. And then right over here we've got some dahlias coming up, and comparing those to our morning glory, we're going much pinker. So let's grab one of these or some of these petals. Which one shall I grab? I hate to grab any of them, but we could take a few petals. Okay, let's just do that. We'll grab some petals. Thanks, Vern. And then from here we've got one pink and an orange one. Let's grab this orange pom-pom. It's so pretty. And I think actually if we cut it, it will encourage more blooms anyway. So let's grab that for orange. Wow, look at these gourds coming up here. Really nice combo of yellow and green. And then the blossom, grab a blossom, which is just closing, but that's a yellowy orange. Compare it to the dandelion here. Yellow and peachier, more orange there. All right, I think we've got cosmos here. We've got, let's get a really pretty one. A pinkish magenta, and then a much paler one here. And then we go into white. We don't think of white as color, but it's important to understand how it relates to other colors also. So those are cool. Oh, we've just been harvesting our grapes, and they go and get a deep, deep purpley color. So let's grab some of those and see how they'll look next to our other colors. I'm looking at different colors of red. This shishitu pepper is red, and then the tomato is red, but one's a little more orangey than the other, so these will be great to use. In my basket of colors, sort of thinking about it as a color wheel, going from orange to red pink violet to violet to blue violet, and just kind of go all around the color wheel and set them up. It's a good way to start thinking about color. Get our blue in there. Well, I'm back in the studio, and I've taken all my subjects that I collected around the garden, in my kitchen, my refrigerator, and I've laid them out in sort of a circular idea of what a color wheel does. And so just the basics of the color wheel. which we'll show you here on the screen, is, you've got your yellow, it goes to yellow-orange, then that turns into orange, red-orange, red, red-violet, towards violet, towards blue-violet, towards blue-green, towards green to yellow-green. And that gets you all around the color wheel with the bright hues, although mine aren't also bright. And then you can see I've got sort of on the outskirts more neutral colors, what happens to a color when it gets, something happens to it, which we'll discuss. And there is sort of a duller color or a more earth tone, and here is one that's turned towards more brown, but still on the warm side. And this is a red that's also getting towards brown. And that's what happens. The same thing we could look at. Yeah, that's pretty much what happens. The next, so once you've got that organized in your mind, that helps you understand the color. Just using the color names, and then using our pencils, you could take, yellow. Well, actually, here, we could just do it just like this. You can put some pencil right down on your paper to see where that color fits in. So we have a yellow, then we've got one that goes a little more towards yellow-orange, then we've got more of an orange, and then kind of a red-orange, a red or a red-orange. Just leave those pencils out there too to look at. And this is just a fun thing to do to get yourself familiar with the color wheel and working your way around it. Slightly deeper red, then the reds start to get a little bit more towards violet. So I'm getting those in there. And this just orients yourself to this concept of the color wheel. So it's a great place to start. Whether you do this or not, or you just watch, now we're going towards blue, or you just watch what I'm doing, either way, just to get the idea of it. So these are the colors that we have in our set of colors, because these are the colors you see in nature, and that's why we use them. There are other colors, there are greens out there that are maybe brighter, but you don't see them in nature, so we don't use them because we don't want to waste our time with those colors that we're going to have to change so much to get them to work. I'll tell you, I love doing this. I could do this all day long. And there's my yellow or green. That kind of gets me around the color wheel with the bright colors. Then as I go kind of to the next level around it, where the colors start to get more neutral, we have those colors covered too. Oh, we do have one more blue, which I don't have any sort of a turquoisey blue or a blue bias towards green really in what I found outside. Had I had a jade vine plant, I would have been all set. But there are very few colors like this in nature. There are some, but the one I know is the tropical jade vine plant. We don't have that here. But that's a color. So we have that color because if you need it, you have to have it. You can't make it, mix it from anything else. Then the colors go more neutral. So we have some of those which sort of come more towards the outside. I think of them as the outside of the color wheel. So we sort of get these warm, neutrally earth tones, I like to call them. And they're very, very useful too. In nature, earth tones, right? Earth tones, nature, hello. Then there's brown everywhere, so we have to have some brown covered, right? I should have gotten a couple of seed pods, but you get the idea of that. And then over here, let's see, and then we have that famous color, dark sepia, right here. What's that for, right? Things that are very dark And in shadow, that's great to use to help with that because you've got color, then you've got the hue of the color getting duller, then you've got the idea of shadows forming and highlights. So I have my white, ivory, and sepia to help with those concepts. And there, that's a walk around the color wheel. And then once you have that, we can get a little bit more specific. We could just talk a little while we're here like this. We could continue to talk a little bit about color theory and bias, double primary color theory that I use, or bias color theory. I just love thinking about color with my real plants all around me because that's what it's about for me. So now we've got these two yellows, which we consider our yellows, and these two reds, which we consider our reds, and our two blues, which we consider our blues. And that gives us two yellow primaries, one warmer, one cooler, or one biased towards yellow, or orange, one biased towards green. The same thing with the red biased towards orange, and the red biased towards violet, and then the blue biased towards violet, the blue biased towards green. And then that leads us to the next concept, which is secondary colors. So you need, if you were just using these colors, you could try to mix everything in nature. And you could get a purple, which is a secondary, which is a combination of a red and a blue. But the question is which red and blue. So that's depending on how bright you want your color. So if you're mixing, we'll go into this in more detail, but I would tend to use my red that's already biased towards violet and my blue biased towards violet if I want to get a real violet or real purpley color. If I want it duller and browner, I might use one of the other primaries. So the same thing, to get a good orange, I would want to use my yellow biased towards orange and my red biased towards orange to get a good orange if I was mixing it. And then to get a green, in nature we don't really use very bright greens, so we don't even put them in our palette. But if I was mixing my yellow or my green, I need to get it from a blue and a yellow. So I would want to use my yellow bias towards blue, green, and my blue bias towards green if I want a bright green. If I want a duller green, which is quite useful in botanical work, I might want to use a blue that's not as bright to mix with that yellow, for example. So that just goes over that double cut bias theory, and that just helps you mix your colors. All right, now I've got my palette out here, and I'm going to start mixing some watercolors and see about mixing colors. So let's just start basic. I'm going to take first a yellow watercolor, and this was my yellow, cadmium yellow, which is sort of biased towards the warm or orange side. And let's see what that looks like to start. So I have a brush. I'm going to take out two brushes in two different sizes. I'm going to mostly probably end up using my favorite, which is this one, the 2. But I've got the 6 here too. I've got clean water up here, and I'll change that frequently. But just to start, I'm just going to get some water and activate that yellow and put it right down here next to this yellow sunflower. That's a pretty good base coat to start that. And then you start to think about what happens to the yellow when it gets darker or, in shadow more, for example. Maybe it's not quite so bright. Like just on this sample here, if it's more light hitting it, it might be brighter. In here, it might be more in shadow. So how would I alter that yellow? Why don't we just start right there? So in color theory, if you only had the basic colors to mix with, the opposite of yellow on the color wheel is violet, and you would mix a little violet to make your yellow dirtier. The more you add the complement, the dirtier it gets. So just for fun, we'll try doing that, but That's not exactly how I like to mix things, and I'll tell you why. But so let's just experiment with that. So let's see, we put down the purple, and we can mix a little bit of, just a touch of that in with the yellow, and put it down next to the yellow, and you see it starts to make that duller, which is nice. You know, that's like an ochre color. So you can do that with watercolor especially. You can also do this. You can take your yellow, which we have there. Let's see what happens when you darken by dirtying and darkening with just a touch of dark sepia with the yellow. What happens then? Let's try that and see what that looks like. And it's just a little greener, but not that different. And you know, you have, the more water you put in your color, obviously the lighter it will be and the less intense. But that's a good way to think about starting to mix. And I love to mix to practice understanding color with the watercolor, because you can change it so quickly. Even though you can mix it with color pencils too, then you have to do a lot more blending to get a good color mixture. So those are different ways. And if you want to have your practice sheet so you know what you did, you could say you had yellow and purple and you got that. You know, you could say here, you know, I put in a little sepia, and those are ways I got all of that, right? Let's say you just take the next one here, my squash blossom, which is got yellow in it, definitely, and also it's more orange. So I'm now putting down orange on my palette. I'm going to put yellow on my palette. I'm going to also just put red down, like if I was using a red, just to see. And so let's see what happens. Now, well, I know the regular yellow, it needs to have some more orange in it. So I'm going to take some yellow, and I'm going to mix a little orange in it, and I'm going to lay that down right there. And that's a pretty good color right there, right? Now, what happens if I had taken yellow and mixed it with a touch of red, not orange? You know, it's pretty much the same because I used less red in that mixture. And so that brings us over, now we're more over in our orange area. Let's try to mix maybe, let's look at our carrot. And the other thing you can think about is when you're working on real form, you have a lighter area where the light is hitting it, and then it gets away from the light, it gets darker. But this, you can see that this orange is not nearly as bright as, let's say, this orange next to it, or that orange. So how do you mix that orange, right? So let's just start by taking plain orange, because we have that in our watercolor. That's really bright. We can dull it. There are different ways to dull it. Now, let's try again. So we talked, if we're going with that opposites on the color wheel, the opposite of orange will be in the blue area. So we could just, for example, for fun, put some blue down. Let's do that and see what happens if we mix a little blue in with our orange. And now you can see it's not nearly as bright, and that's pretty close to that. Maybe just a touch more orange in that mixture. You know, I think about color mixing like cooking. Does it need more sugar? Does it need more salt? You know, what does it need? And I can almost taste the color variation. I'd say that first one was very good as a blend on that, you know. So I'm going to do that again because I want to lay a little bit more of that down. So I'm going to put down more orange, and I'm going to make up a blend. Get a little bit more water in there. Let's see what that looks like. Now that one, I might have gotten a little too dirty, so I can brighten it by adding more orange in it. And the other thing you can think about is by adding water, you can get lighter, right? And then you can have more intense color at that end for your gradation. And then you can also change it a bit more in your shadow by one idea is more of that blue in that end, right? And that might do it. The other way, and this you can also do with your color pencils on top of when that dries. The other way I might want to try it, just for fun, again, I'm going to try my orange. I'm going to put down some more fresh orange. And this time I'm going to mix with a touch of dark sepia and see what that looks like, just for variety. Not that different, right? So that's another way to get that. And then a little more sepia if I want more of my shadow side. So there again, you can mix that orange and dull it with blue. You can mix that orange and you can dull it with a little sepia. And that kind of gets you sort of heading around. So if I want to keep going around, let's put down my red. And I have a couple more reds that I use. I have my madder because it's just a useful color. It's a little deeper. I've got my more violet red, which is my middle purple pink. And if I was going to try to mix this tomato, which is kind of, if I just put down what I consider my red orange, yeah, if that's, good but a little bright. That's why I could put a little bit of madder in it because that's a little duller to change that color. Or going back to color theory, the opposite of red on the color wheel is green. So I could dull my red with a little green. And let's see what that does. And that gets a pretty good color. Okay, so we've done some brighter and some duller colors. We're getting that idea. We could go all around the color wheel and do this. That's one idea. Let me just switch modes a little bit to show you the idea of taking it to the next level. For example, here I've got a grape, just for fun. I'm going to go back step a little to our technique. When we do a grisaille, here I've got an indigo pencil because clearly this grape is pretty indigo looking. And let's say I started shading with indigo pencil, a color pencil, and left a good highlighted area just to kind of bring it around to the techniques we normally do. And then let's do watercolor over that. So what color would the watercolor be? Okay, well, we know we tell ourselves right away it's a blue. Not a very bright blue, right? So I'm going to put down a blue and some dark sepia just to have that on my palette. And I'm going to see what blue looks like and then say, well, it's got to be not as bright as that. So I'm trying by adding dark sepia because that's one way to change the blue, and that looks very good. The other way to change the blue would be, again, going to the opposite of blue on the color wheel. So that would be blue with a little orange. So the opposite of what we did for the carrot, we can do over here for the grape. And that looks pretty good too. So then what I could do is take that color that I've created there, because we said the blue with a touch of orange was good, and I can put that right over this here to fill in a bit and to use the wash. So I'm applying just what we've gone over so you can see how will you put it on a form, especially a form that you want to be round and three-dimensional looking. So there, that's how to do that. And that took us to the opposite of the orange, to the blue. We could go to the red to the green that way. Green is such an important color, so let's think about that. So I've got my permanent green olive, which in all honesty, I use this green most of the time. It's a really good basic green. It's bright enough, and it even when you use it lighter with a lot of water, it's like a good inside veining color too. And then if I need to change it a bit, for example, that green, it's clearly got more yellow and orange in it, and it's not as bright as that. So again, the opposite of green would be some red. Let's see what happens when we do that. Let's just take a little red in with our green. But I need a lot more green because you just want to keep it green but just dull it a little bit. So then you don't want to have too much of that opposite in there. But look at that, right away from that to that. And that was just by adding a little bit of red. So these are the basic ideas of color theory. And then the double color primary or color bias theory, let's go over that again a little bit and show something where explain that. So let's say we have this echinacea petal, which is a bright pink. You know, it's in the red family, but it would be hard to change a red and get it to look like that if that was the only red you had in your palette, because you have to mix red and blue to get that sort of pink, right? But if you have your other, which is your middle purple pink, that's going to be much closer. It's a little bright for that, right? But that's getting you in the right direction because you can always duller color. It's hard to get it brighter. And actually almost even putting a little of the red in with that pink. Let's see what that does. It's still pretty bright. So the opposite of this would be more like a little touch of yellow in there if you wanted to just alter it that way. Let's try that. You want to practice mixing your color several different ways. Now that's too red. Too much yellow went in that. You want to try to be able to mix colors differently and get the same result, because there are many ways to get to the same color. So that's really good practice too. So if we want to dull this pink or this violet, let's add a touch of orange in it and see what happens. See if that's going to get us there. Still not doing it for me. I think it's got to be actually, some colors are harder to mix than others, which are great. Actually, let's try the same pink with just a little dark sepia. Curious to see what happens that. Oh, whoa, right there. Bingo! So dark sepia is a magic color because it is a combination of all three primaries. And to prove that to you, I'm going to take any three primaries, a yellow, a red, and a blue, and I'm going to see what happens when I mix them together. Blue, red, yellow. Depends on how much of each you put in there, but it will get you towards a color which is more like a gray or a neutral. And the dark sepia is that, but really dark. So it's got, in other words, it has in it a little of everything. And that's how you get your colors darker and duller, by putting some of the opposite colors in there. And so that's why that complementary color theory works. Because green is mixed up of yellow and blue makes green, and the opposite is red. So that would give you red, yellow, and blue, all three primaries. And that's what dark sepia is. It's duller, it's a little of everything. So that's one way to dull a color. Okay, so now we've sort of got our way around doing the bright colors and dulling the colors a little. Let's move out even further and get into what happens when you're dealing with earth tones, which are almost neutral colors. So I put a couple of things here, a hydrangea dried leaf and a tomato that's much more brown looking. So let's try to mix them. Obviously, if you have color pencils that are brown, sure, you can lay those down and get the color. But if you're trying to get it precise, you might have to change it a little. Or if you want to do the watercolor, you can probably get a neutral, but you can also mix it. Because we're learning about what are the ingredients in a color and how do you get it, it's good to try to mix it. So we're going to try again just to mix it with our watercolors. So this is sort of a warm neutral. So I'd say it's got quite a bit of yellow in it because it's kind of warm colored, but clearly not so bright yellow. So there's one way to get to it would be, again, to take the opposite and see what happens if I mix orange, purple and yellow together. And look at that. You get towards a brown, a neutral. And that is very close to that. So that's one way to do it. If it needs to be more on the cool side, let's say, you can add more of that purple, or maybe it needs a little extra blue in there. I could even go in and get a little blue to add to it and see what happens to change it that way. That went a little too gray. Let's try this one now. Now, okay, I can put down, to start, I could start with a brown watercolor. So I'm going to get out a basic brown watercolor and see what that looks like. And I could say, well, yeah, but it's too red and too bright. I got to dull it, dirty it a little bit. So again, I'm sure if I just mix a little sepia in with that, let's see what happens there. You know, that's pretty good. Or I could say, let's take that brown and maybe it needs, I don't know. Does it need red? Does it need green? I mean, this side of the tomato, it's got more red in it. Let's try that just for fun. Maybe that's too much. Let's see. There. That's a very brown with a lot of red in it. Going back again to the other side, I can make it as brown and then I can alter it. Maybe I want it with a little more blue in it, so it's cooler looking. Let's try that. And then the third thing we're going to try is just there. That's pretty close. Is just trying to mix that brown with our primaries. Okay, just to understand what's in it. So we've got yellow. We know we got yellow. And we need a little red. That gets us more orange. So if we put some blue in, we've got to lay out some more blue now. What's going to happen to that color? And let's lay it down and see. Okay, look at that. There. That gets me very close to that. So you can mix it with the primaries, or you can start with your brown and adjust it that way. And the same thing with this one here. We mix this one. You could also, for example, take a brown, add some more yellow to it. And if it's still going to be too bright, maybe a little blue. You can mix it that way. There's so many, it's fun to try to mix colors and get close.
And once you've explored that, I recommend you pick one of your subjects and you decide to draw your subject and get that accurate color using what we learned in this lesson to get your color accurate. So let's see, I'll do one on this page here. What shall I do? It's always a good question to choose. That's my hardest part because I want to do everything. Eeny, miny, I wish you could shout out to me what to draw now. I want to do something that's a good mixture of color and not too complicated, so I can do it pretty quickly. Let's try this tomato right there. Okay, so then what I would do is just try to mix those colors, which we did right here. Okay, so we got that base coat by mixing, let's do it for fun, let's do it again with the red and some blue in there. You can start to use all what's left on your palette here. And that's going to be very violet, but if I go and get more yellow in it, that should make it brown it up a bit. But this still looks to me like it may need more blue in it. So I'm going to put down some more blue. I could use blue, I could use a little sepia. Let's just try to do it with blue. And that's a good base coat. So then what I would do, so that I've mixed my color there, I would draw out my subject. I'm going to put a little of this at the bottom. Okay, I've got my subject drawn. And I'm going to wet the whole drawing. And I'm going to mix my color. I had some here, but maybe I'm going to add to it. So I'm going to darken it a bit. And I'm going to put it down right on top. And I'm going to leave a highlight. Right up in there. And that would be not a bad base coat. I could darken it a little bit more, but so maybe I will, but I'll let it dry a little because it's quite wet. So meanwhile, I'll mix it up and I'll darken it a little bit more. This time I've got some brown and put in a little red and blue in there to see what I'll get. Let's see. Maybe a little more blue. And I could darken this still a bit more. And then when that's dry, I can go in there and I can, with my regular pencils, work on it. And I could add some color in there, and that's sort of a olivey green. So just having what I have out here, it's green, but let's put some sepia in it so it's not nearly as bright. That should make it kind of olive, and let's put that over it, right in there. And that's a good start for that. Well, I've had a lot of fun mixing these colors, and I hope you have some fun too, just getting the chance to really explore color. Okay, so I'd say my watercolor is dry, and I'm going for that right there, and I've got out some different colors, a couple of browns, something to add a little red if needed, darker shades. You always want to get your shades that you're going to use for your shading to have some of the color of the local color in it, but maybe darker. So here I've got sepia and I've got red violet there as two possibilities to use. I could consider a brown, but I don't think that would do it. I think these are good, and yep, I think I'm just going to go with these colors here. So then what I would do is I would start to redraw the edge and shade in a bit. And so you work right on top of that watercolor base, which is really gets you a good start. And then I'm shading the whole form at first, just to really understand and try to describe how the light is hitting the subject in a nutshell. So I'm adding a little layer of the red violet there. And if I see any other, because this color is got a little of other things in it, it's an interesting color. If I wanted to warm it up, for example, you know, I could put some of this in it. You can see right away it starts to warm up the color a little bit. And then you just keep making those kinds of adjustments. To kind of describe it, and then I can get really dark in my shadow side by putting some sepia over all of this, but I wouldn't do that too heavy at first. So you get a nice subtle blending, but a little on that dark side. You want a nice dark edge, nice dark shadow side. And I would build it that way. And then I just keep going from there. And if I need lighter colors up in here, that's when you get into your white or your ivory, and you can kind of press all the colors together. But I'm going to get the whole thing a bit darker, because overall I want it to feel like that color. So overall it needs to still be darker, but leaving room for those shadows and highlights. So now I'm darkening a bit more, just to get the overall color, the local color or the overall color feeling darker. And then you can take your time to, you know, have fun and slowly build your colors and continue to look. And if you say to yourself that, oh, feels like maybe there's a little more red or pink in it, or down here it's redder and pink, or wherever it is, for example, you get a pencil out. That's going to give you a little more redness to it, and you can add that in. So let's say I want to make the whole thing, you know, a bit redder. And start to add that in. However it feels right to me. I can just keep making those adjustments. And then towards the end I can start to press more harder, a little bit, and go back and do more of that burnishing if I want, to blend the colors together even more. If you do that, then you have to, especially in the dark areas, you want to still go back in and then add more darker pencil on top. Okay, so there, that's how you would work on that one, and that I could work on that quite a bit more. but this is just about mixing the color. So on this one, you have to say to yourself, well, what would be the shadows? So I've got this here. I'm testing. I think that looks, it's like a warmer, redder, orangey, but dull, but more earth tony, not as bright. And I think I'm going to start this with that. So I would do the same idea here, which is I would start in my shadow area and add that in. The same idea, I think about the bending away and towards the light as I do that. Maybe this shadow will then move into my brighter orange here, let's say, and I can again test it on the little dab there. I like that color. I might want to use this one here. It might not be much of a color, but this will work. And again, building it slowly. Maybe I'm stroking in different directions to get the color. And I would just keep working on that, you know, to get as much detail as I want, or not, because here in this lesson, we're practicing, you know, getting our natural colors in nature. And that's pretty much a good start to what goes on in the basics of using color theory to help us mix realistic colors in nature and get their shadow colors and their highlights. So have fun with this. Color is really great, but it's also nice to keep your color looking three-dimensional. So have fun.
Here is my sunflower color wheel that I created to show petals going all around the color wheel. The top petals are the brighter colored petals, and then underneath them are petals of the same hues but more in shadow, to practice mixing my colors with shadow colors and a little bit of highlighting for each petal. So that way, and I wrote down little color dabs and the numbers of every color I use so that I can refer to this color wheel if I need to know on a certain green what color should I use for the shadow on a bright green, and then on a slightly darker, duller green, what might I use to make that color?
This red here is just a pale geranium lake, and then I used a little bit of red violet to shade it, and maybe just a touch of dark sepia in the bits of shadow, and I probably use some white to burnish it a little bit. That's one way to mix it. And over here on this blue, a bright blue here, I used ultramarine, a little indigo, and also a little dark sepia to get that bright one. And let's go over and look at a couple of greens here. So to get this bright green here, I used permanent green, olive, with a little bit of chrome oxide green for darker, and I might have gone into a little, if I just to fool around with some sepia. And then I played around with the idea of the petal underneath or behind in shadow and less bright, and for fun this time I did it with the opposite. So green, the opposite is kind of orangey or red orange, and I used a little orange, and you can kind of see how it dulls the color a little bit. So sometimes I've tried dulling with the complement opposite on the color wheel, and sometimes just using my dark sepia to darken. So there's really many ways to mix color. There isn't just one way. So I invite you to explore, have fun, and make notes of what you do so you can refer to those in the future.
And doing this exercise was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot doing it, and it's also becomes a good record. So you could create your own fantasy color wheel. I made mine of a sunflower. You could make yours of something else, or just practice making a color wheel this way on like I said, an imaginary subject or just as colors. So have fun practicing and mixing, and I can't wait to see what you do.